Welcome to the ecq's webinar on how to vote cards for state government elections. This webinar will cover the how to vote card definitions and requirements under the Electoral Act of 1992, stepping through what a how to vote card is, what is its distribution, the authorisation and content requirements for cards, and the lodgment process with the ecq for cards to be accepted. Schedule 1 Dictionary of the Electoral Act of 1992 defines a how to vote card for state government elections. It's important to understand what is included in this definition, as this will tell us whether a card needs to meet the compliance requirements of a how to vote card and whether it must be submitted to the ecq prior to distribution. A how to vote card is a card, handbill, or pamphlet that is or includes a representation of a ballot paper or part of a ballot paper, or something apparently intended to represent a ballot paper or part of a ballot paper, or lists the name of any or all of the candidates for an election with a number indicating an order of voting preference against the names of any or all of the candidates, or otherwise directs or encourages the making of preference votes other than first preference votes in a particular way. A card, handbill, or pamphlet that meets any, that's one or more, of these three parts of the definition is a how to vote card under the Electoral Act. We're going to take some time to look at some examples that meet this definition. This might go without saying, but these examples are generic and purely for illustrative purposes in this webinar. Here is an example that meets the first part of the definition. It is or includes a representation or an intended representation of a ballot paper. Here's an example that meets the second part of the definition. Here we can see that the candidate has listed the names of all the candidates in his election with numbers indicating an order of voting preference next to some of the candidates. Any or all in this part of the definition can mean one, some, or all. Here's our third and final example. Instead of using a picture of a ballot or a list of names with numbers next to the names, this candidate has met the third part of the definition by using another method, in this case, writing directions out in long form to encourage voters how to cast their preferences. A card, handbill, or pamphlet that meets any of these three parts of the Act's definition will be considered a how to vote card. The Electoral Act also defines the distribution of how to vote cards. It includes making the card available to other persons. For example, a person is distributing how to vote cards if they hand the cards to people, or if they leave a stack of cards out for people to take away, or if they include a how to vote card in a mail out to voters. The distribution of how to vote cards does not include merely displaying the card publicly. For example, a person is not distributing a how to vote card if they stick it up on a wall for people to see. This definition is also important for us to know, as any how to vote card that will be distributed during an election or by-election period must meet its compliance requirements. Now that we've looked at the definitions of a how to vote card and its distribution, let's see what the Electoral Act tells us must happen with how to vote cards that will be distributed. Starting at the top, if election material meets the definition of a how to vote card, and it is going to be distributed any time during the election period, then it must meet the authorisation and other compliance requirements that are set out in the Electoral Act. The first of these requirements is for the card to be authorised correctly. Like with other election material, an authorisation shows the reader who has authorised a how to vote card and on whose behalf the card was authorised. All how to vote card authorisations must include the authoriser's name, their address, which cannot be a PO box, and the name of the person or party the card was authorised for. In addition to these three features, an authorisation must also include the following, based on who the card is authorised for. A card that is authorised for a registered political party or a candidate being endorsed by a registered political party must include the party's registered full name or registered abbreviation. The register referred to here is the Register of Political Parties for the state of Queensland. This register is kept by the ecq and is available on their website. The example provided in section 182 of the Electoral Act is Authorised P. Smith, 100 Green Street, Brisbane, for name of registered political party. A card that is authorised for a candidate who is not endorsed by a registered political party must include the candidate's name and the word candidate. The example provided in the Act is Authorised R. Jones, 1 Green Street, Brisbane, for R. Jones, candidate. Section 182 of the Electoral Act also sets out how an authorisation must appear. An authorisation must be in prominent, legible characters. For example, the contrast between the text of the authorisation and the background of the card must be high so that people can read the authorisation without difficulty. And it must appear at the end of each side of a How to Vote card that contains print. Additionally, the Act sets out minimum font size requirements for an authorisation. The minimum font size required corresponds with the size of the card. For cards that are A6 size or smaller, the authorisation must be in a minimum of a 10-point font. For cards that are larger than A6, up to an A3 size, the authorisation must be in a minimum of a 14-point font. This middle size includes the most common How to Vote card sizes, DL, which is a third of an A4, A5 size, and A4 size. For cards that are larger than A3, the authorisation must be in a minimum of 20-point font. Section 185 of the Electoral Act is about misleading voters. How to Vote cards must not mislead voters in the ways of voting or mislead voters into casting an informal vote. Here is a very basic example of a How to Vote card that would be considered misleading. In state government elections and by-elections, full preferential voting applies. Voters must number all boxes in order of their preference. This How to Vote card encourages voters to list 1 and 2 only, which would result in an informal vote. This card is non-compliant and penalties may apply under Section 185 of the Act. If it was lodged with the ecq for distribution on election day, it would be rejected. Other ways a card might mislead and confuse voters could include misspelling candidate names or text in an authorisation, or listing candidates in an order other than their ballot order. We've seen part of this process before. We've already spoken about the first 3 steps, which covered the authorisation and compliance requirements for How to Vote cards that will be distributed during an election period. Continuing on, if that same How to Vote card is going to be distributed specifically on election day itself, that is, on the Saturday of an election or a by-election, then in addition to needing to meet the authorisation and other compliance requirements under the Act, it must also be submitted to the ecq and approved before it is distributed on election day. Section 183 of the Electoral Act sets out the lodgment of How to Vote cards with the ecq, for them to be scrutinised and accepted by the ecq prior to the card's distribution on election day. A How to Vote card that will be distributed on election day must move through the following before it can be distributed. The Act requires that the card must be submitted to the ecq no later than 5 p.m. on the Friday, that is 7 days before election day. For example, for a state government election on Saturday, 26th of October, a card being distributed on election day must be submitted to the ecq by 5 p.m. on Friday, 18 October. To lodge, please submit either a hard copy or high-resolution soft copy of the card, which accurately reflects the size at which the card will be distributed, and a completed Form 53 lodgment of how to vote cards, which includes the statutory declaration required for lodgment. Lodgement of these two required items can be made either via online channels or in person. For endorsed candidates and registered political parties, lodgement must be directly to the ECQ's head office team. For non-endorsed candidates, lodgement can be made either to the ECQ's head office or to the candidate's local returning officer. Once a card is submitted to the ECQ, the How to Vote card team will check that the How to Vote card meets its legislative requirements and will send an email advising whether the card is accepted or rejected to be distributed on a polling day. Accepted How to Vote cards are also displayed on the ECQ's website. For more information about how to vote cards in state government elections and by-elections, please head to the ECQ's Fact Sheets and Forms page at www.ecq.qld.gov.au/factsheets. Fact Sheet 3 is all about how to vote cards, and Form 53 is also kept there for when you are ready to submit a how to vote card to the ECQ. In addition to the ECQ's website, you can also review the Electoral Act 1992 yourself. If you need to contact the ECQ about how to vote cards, you can email htvcards@ecq.qld.gov.au or call our general line on 1300 881 665. Please note that the ECQ provides general advice only. Should you be in any doubt regarding your obligations, please seek independent legal advice. Thanks for watching the ECQ's webinar about how to vote cards for state government elections.